Hi, everybody. So we're going to get started talking about everybody's character. And in this particular um, segment of the assignment, what you were doing was adding a background and some text. Um, so we're going to talk about the background and text today, of course, but we'll also continue to talk about the character and what we can do to make it more, you know, just bring it to life a little bit more, anything we can do. But I would say that primarily um, at this stage, finding a good background is actually, it takes a little bit of playing around and experimenting. So uh, don't be surprised if you have to keep playing around to find a good one. I find that it's really the most important part at this phase. So I actually have some examples. So these are some examples from students that have been in my classes before. And I just want to say before we talk about these that most of these students, I'm not sure if all of them, but certainly most of these students have never worked in Photoshop before this class. I just wanted to say that at the outset because I think it's always good when you see student examples to know where they were starting with. Anyhow, so uh, these are finished examples. So these are students who are actually, this is their maybe their last submission in milestone 5 or their second to last, so if yours doesn't look as polished as this one, it's because we still have a little while to go here before we're done. But you can see sort of like the possibilities here of how, when we get to the end, of how really kind of amazing these can look. And so let's talk a little bit about the backgrounds here. And just to kind of start with Flip and Food Fred here. So you can see that behind Flip and Food Fred, that it's a very sort of simple background, and we have just one element here that draws our eye, which is this apple. The rest is pretty, like it's a countertop, maybe somewhere in a kitchen perhaps. And Flip and Food Fred is like doing a little dance or jumping or, something like that. And you can see how this simple background behind the character and also behind the text really helps make the character stand out more. That's really, we tend to have to really exaggerate the simplicity of the background for this particular project. In graphic design, um, we always have like a foreground and a background, like whatever you're doing, whether it's a web design or an ad or some other type of design, we tend to always have something that's a focal point. And so everything around it we simplify. And so that's pretty standard. However, in this assignment, because we're building our character out of objects and we're relying in a certain way on the viewer to assemble it in their mind and our own ingenuity at building the character, like making it into arms and legs or heads or whatever we're doing with it. So we actually rely on those two things, our ingenuity of assembling the objects and then also the viewer reading it as a body. And so having a lot of detail in the background actually can make the character not cohese, like read as a character, as a kind of unified body, I should say, because then we start just seeing it as objects because it blends into the background. Just as a way of kind of trying to understand that. So in all of these, um, there's a little more detail in this one, Rock and Rhapsody Roy, but it's still kind of faded a little bit and also blurred, like this one. It's kind of gives like the background is quite a little, there's a lot of sort of blurring and kind of atmospheric effects, which really helps bring the character forward so that we don't get drawn into the background. And this one, typically this is the one that's, I think, the simplest in the sense that this student actually just played with some gradients to create the background. And in general, I like if students actually use a photograph for their background to create the context. But I kind of liked what this particular student did. I thought it was really kind of still very lively and kind of fit with the character. So I kind of sometimes it's good to be flexible with the assignment requirements if the results are working well. So I just want to say that in general that we do want to photograph. Now this one, I love this one. Now this is definitely a student who had never done Photoshop. I thought this was a really awesome result. This student used a lot of the tools in Photoshop that we've learned. And in terms of the background, there's this really lovely kind of background that's like really gives us sort of an idea of a garden, kind of like droplets of water and rain and kind of like this sort of greens and yellows, the freshness of the garden, but there's no kind of specific detail that kind of pulls our eye away from the character. So I thought this was an excellent background. This one here, Flippin' Food Fred, is a little more detailed. It's Flippin' Food Fred's on a grill. There's more detail in the background, but it's still not, it still works, I think partly because the character is pretty strong in terms of the colors and the solidity of the character, like all of these warm colors. So, and then the background is kind of darker in places, which can really help too. If you have a darker background or a lighter background, those two things can also really help your character pop. But it comes down to experimenting a little bit. You really do have to experiment to try to find that background. Sometimes you have to go through some different backgrounds. Sometimes you have to move your background around, which we'll probably do today. Move it around or change the size, make it bigger, add some blur effects to it or other kinds of effects to kind of like make it work as that nice backdrop that we're looking for. Okay, I hope that's been helpful. Let's get started. Okay, Lawrence. Well, I love this text. I think it looks awesome. I just also love the way you kind of flowed along the perspective of the counter, which I think is excellent. And so, and the shadow looks really great. Now, the shadow, I just want to let everybody know, it's not a requirement to have a shadow. It can really help in certain situations. Sometimes the shadow, again, it works really well to kind of create that sense of dimension. And there's a really good video in the instructions for this assignment for how to do that. So I would say with the background, I would say that that the background works except for having these elements in the background. These things, what they're doing is really drawing the eye away from your character, just like I talked about before. So what I would do, now you mentioned that you actually took this photograph. It's a beautiful photograph. So you might just want to move all of these elements out and retake it. I think that would be awesome for your character. Sometimes what you can do, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to use your character again as an example. Sometimes what you can do is just take and enlarge, holding down the Shift key, of course. You can enlarge a background that you have, provided it has enough resolution. You can sort of move it around to see, for example, like where might be a good spot. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get something for yours. I'm sort of looking at this little spot in here and see, because it doesn't have any objects behind it. But you can kind of sometimes do that and find a spot that has more, more what we call negative space. I think I would have to go pretty, I have to transform it pretty big. So let it do its job here. Hold on. Oh yeah, enlarging the background in this particular case, I don't think was a particularly good solution. And again, that just sometimes you just have to work with the photograph that you have. But in any case, I hope that gives you an idea of what you might do for the background, just in terms of rephotographing without the objects, or maybe just having one simple object along the side might be good, but away from behind your character or close to your character. Something else I just want to say here too, as a general comment, is that I may have mentioned this already, but something that does seem to happen when you work on something is that you get to know it very, very well, especially one specific sort of central part of it. And that when you look at the overall piece, you know the part so well that you don't see it the way other people do. And I find this is especially true when you add backgrounds. is that you know, you may have to like simplify it or make adjustments because again you're so familiar with each part. I found that very true in my own work. So all right, okay, well keep experimenting and I know you'll find something great. All right. Yeah, I think you've got a really good choice for your background. It's really um, just so what you're trying to do with the background is provide just enough detail that we get an idea of where the character is, but not really more than that. Like it just needs to have almost like a hint of it. Like so in this case, we automatically know, oh, he's standing on a stage. But then you have this, and there's this sort of really kind of cool atmospheric lighting. But then the rest of it is really just very simple. And actually, a stage is actually really a wonderful, in your case, it's literal, like you actually have your character standing on a stage. But for everybody else, you can sort of think about your background as being a metaphorical stage, you know, that it really needs to kind of embody the same qualities as a real stage would. And why are stages the way they are? Like if you look at a real stage, like if you go to a performance or concert somewhere, you know, and in this case, like sort of similar to this, where you just have maybe like a single performer, you know, what they will most often do is try to really create this sense of simplicity and highlight for that performer, you know? And that's what you're trying to do here is highlight your performer, but simplify everything else, you know? So anyhow, I think this looks awesome. Okay, so your text, yeah, you know, so you do not have to have a clipping mask for your text, but you can. You know, you can just, you know, work with text in other ways. I would say the main thing for your particular uh, text is that it's a little hard to read. Um, okay, so let me just take this out here. Maybe I'll just see here. So, okay, so there's a couple reasons why. So this particular style of text, if this is how it looks like, sometimes text does get changed when it comes into my Photoshop, but I don't think I checked any boxes to change it. So if this is your text, I would keep experimenting with a different text because it seems like maybe that text is just a little hard to read, you know. And again, it happens when I'm going to go up into the window menu here and go to character, because then if you have the character window open, it often is a little easier to quickly make changes. But you know, you want to kind of you want a text that has character, like that fits to your particular um, the style you're going for, but you do also want it to be something that's, you know, relatively easy to read. So there are some fonts seem to have that are already ah, that are already built into Adobe, and you also when you have um, let me just my Photoshop is a little bit slow today. I'm not quite sure why. Hold on. So yeah, I might need to restart my Photoshop. Sometimes that happens. I've been opening a lot of large files today, and sometimes it just gets a little slow. But so I just quickly changed it to, you know, a very, you know, not too crazy font, and it doesn't have a lot of character, but on the other hand, it's a little easier to read. So you kind of want to make a balance, you know, a balance between something that is has the character you want, but also is a little easier to read. So I'd keep experimenting with that. And the same with your um, you know, your clipping mask. So this particular photograph you have, which is a really cool photograph, but it has a lot of black in it, darks, oranges and blacks in it, and the orange you can see is showing up, but the black is getting a little lost. So should be easy to fix. You could find another photo for that, or just, you know, it kind of looks kind of cool. So I would just keep experimenting with that. In general, with a darker background, what you want is you want sort of lighter, you would want lighter text to stand out against it. So I would keep experimenting with that. The other thing I would do too is I would move this text here up below, like here, maybe here, or maybe at the end, like have the whole thing curved. Because I think when you separate text like that, even though it looks cool, it can also make it a little hard to read. So I tend to put it together, put that text together. Okay. The other thing I would keep experimenting with is your character. We've talked a little bit about your character. I think it's coming along, but I think you could do a little bit more to bring it to life. We've talked a little bit about the guitar and how the guitar might not be the best choice for the body. You might want to experiment more with that, and also maybe, see where that leads you. You mentioned that you were having trouble brainstorming another type of torso that would relate to the musical theme. Um, so maybe looking at those examples earlier, I think, let's see, I still have them. Do I still have them up? I think I do. Here they are. So you might get some ideas here for Rock and Rhapsody Roy, of things you might do. I actually have another example of Rock and Rhapsody Roy somewhere too that I think is using a speaker for the body, but this is like a record. Um, so you can kind of like maybe play around with that a little bit more and see what you might come up with. Okay, well, just keep experimenting with the text and the character. Oh, all right, so here is your garden glitter gland. Just remember to put that into your text here, the full name. Again, when we work with a client, it's really important that we use their name for their product or service or whatever, their business, restaurant, whatever it is we're working on. So you just want to have that. Okay, and I definitely like the text that you have. Let me just zoom in a little bit more. Yeah, I think that's a great idea to have this text. Um, and this especially one right here, I think that suits your character quite a lot. It's sort of traditional and also kind of masculine looking, which I think suits your character. And I would say, so the thing that I would work on here a little bit more is the balance of some of the spaces here. Let's just zoom out again. I would start by making your character quite a bit bigger. You really want to, your character wants to just, again, let's just look at those examples. You really want your character to fill the space like all of these do, because it really needs to dominate the space. And then the background is really not it's like it is a background. So that's really important in terms of the way you put your space together. And also the text should be I would make it quite a bit bigger, because again, it really needs to stand out and people need to read it pretty quickly. Okay, so that's the main thing I would work on here. Yeah, I think that the photograph, what I would do with the photograph maybe is experiment with maybe making it a little, like quite a bit bigger, to maybe take a lot of that, some of that background detail out that, when you think of the background, how many leaves do you need to make it look like a gardening background? You really only need a couple, or, so you can kind of think about, and it just, again, like we don't want people to spend their time looking at the background. It really needs to just be something very, like I'd almost be inclined to even make it possibly even a little bit bigger. Again, sometimes you can't with a photograph that you have, but yours is such a good, yeah, you have like a good resolution here, so you could try doing that. And now once you make your character quite a lot bigger and your text a lot bigger, that could really start to come together. I could even see making your background even a little bit bigger, because I'm not sure if we need to see so many stones and so many, bricks, but that could be a good start. So I would experiment with those three things: make your character bigger, make your text bigger, experiment with your background. That would be just keep working on that balance, and really, spend some time, like kind of like, sometimes it's really good to, like, after you've worked on your project for a while, go away for a couple of hours, open it up, and then sometimes you'll notice things in your designs that you didn't notice before, that, like, I as an observer can come in, sort of really see it, because I'm not so close to it. And like now you can see that just by doing what I just did here, we're really starting to see the character a little bit more. And once the character is bigger, that's going to make such a big difference. Okay, so that's what I'd work on, and then maybe next week we'll talk a little bit more about, more things we can do. But that would be a good, a good start. And if you don't like the way this looks, like I understand that, maybe you really love that previous photograph. Go find another photograph that sort of fits the idea of a backdrop, like we've been talking about. Like maybe there's something else that will catch your eye and you'll like, and you can use and that will fit this idea. But you definitely still want to enlarge your character and your text no matter what you do. So thank you so much for submitting your assignment by the group critique. That's great. I think this is the first time I've seen it in a while, which is fabulous to be able to talk a little bit more about it. Okay, so you've garbage dumped Dan. I think this text is really, it's starting to come along really nicely. I like the size of, like the style of it. I could see it getting a little bit bigger, but I do like just the kind of the large blocky quality and also your clipping mass. I think that's going to really come along nicely. Let's talk a little bit about your character design. I think that's the part we want to definitely work on a little bit more this week. It looks like you've got the layer mask going on, which is great. I think you just need to kind of keep thinking and experimenting a little bit more about making your character come to life. And something to think about is when you work with objects, it's often really good to work with the whole object. Sometimes we'll cut things off, but in general, like you've got the crayon here, and that works really well as an arm, as the full object. Whereas right here, this sock, it's not, I don't think it's quite working yet because you have sort of just a little bit, and you're trying to, I think, make a little bit of sort of a garment for your character, and sometimes it's a little hard to do that. So I would be inclined to instead just work a little bit more on, yeah, by the way, I think the legs are working well. I'm not sure this element, all of these, here I might take all of this out. It's good to be ruthless sometimes, even this too. Take all this out and then just start to think about, okay, now what could we do here to make it look more like a living, breathing character? Like kind of like this is an interesting element, the fish. I might just maybe use the whole fish. So I'm gonna maybe I'd go back and make the layer mask for the whole fish in there, and then take your crayons and maybe make them arms, so you'd have um, some arms here, and with this I would take it behind the fish. Come on. Oh, I see. Sometimes I forget to do that. So take that behind the fish so that the arm appears to be kind of coming out, So, and then you can take, if you want to duplicate that to make another arm, it does help, but we've talked about this in group critiques before, how symmetry can really bring your character to life. So I might just like duplicate this by dragging this layer down to the little duplicate layer there, and then it's sort of, and then I can take and just grab it and maybe move it over. It's great because then you don't have to do the layer mask again. So you can kind of play with that. So I just kind of keep working, I'd maybe delete this layer mask for the fish and build a new one with, the whole thing showing, or maybe use a different body and a different head, because I don't know if you have quite enough objects here. You need to have a minimum of 5 objects, so maybe, yeah, keep experimenting. I think it just needs a little bit more experimentation. I think you've got the technique down with the layer mask. Now, why, it looks to me like your background, when I opened the file, your background appeared to be as a linked file. What that does is in Photoshop, what that does is it links another file. And unless you have that particular image in the right place on your computer, it won't show up when you send the Photoshop file. So how can you fix that? What you want to do is just go in just like, the way you would have brought this photograph in, just the technique that we covered back in that you did for this, that we covered in milestone 3 task 2, where you brought the photos in. That's how you could just bring in that background. So for example, we could take, you can take and get another layer in here just like that, build a layer, and then you can just kind of paste your photograph into this layer, just drag it into there, and then that's your background. So that'll really help to see your background too. Well, I'll be, I'll have more feedback next week when I look at your background. But for now, I'd really put the focus on building your character. Really work on that, and then we can take care of some of the other stuff next week. Okay, so I look forward to seeing your character, and let me know if you have any questions. I'm glad you were able to submit your work as well to the group critique. It's great to see it here and talk about it. In general, in all of our classes, for our design classes, we do have, a lot of us have these group critiques, and it's really a great opportunity to, sort of interact with the rest of class and see what everyone's working on and get some really detailed feedback. So I'm glad you're able to do that. All right, so Terrible Toys Todd. Yes, so this is great. I love this text. In terms of the style, I think it works really well for the idea of Terrible Toys Todd. And let's just zoom in now. You said that you rebuilt your character. Let's just zoom in a little bit more here. Okay, yeah, you've got your layer masks in here. So yeah, so overall, I think it's looking really good. I love the kind of you've already got this really interesting movement to your character, which is pretty cool. I would say that yeah, the arms are okay. I was thinking that maybe there's a little bit of a sense. Can you see how this is cut off a little bit here in the original photograph? So what happens here is we don't get sort of like all of the wonderful detail here of the fur. And so that's something that should be pretty easy to find, like a teddy bear arm that's a little bit more high resolution. In fact, let's do that now, because I think you also want to do that for your head. I think the head is a little bit kind of pixelated, and I think this is such an important part of your character. Let's just look at this too here. It's a little bit blurry, but mm, yeah, I think those will work, and I think the other parts work. It's just these furry elements here. So let's go look at it for a teddy bear in Google. Search term teddy bear is not uh, the only search term we could use, any stuffed toy really to get an arm, but we're going to do that search term of going larger than, and we're going to make sure to choose a photo here. Anyhow, just like what we've done before, and then we'll try to see if we can find an arm that's, a lot of these have the arm kind of like against the body, and that's, this one's a, I don't think I really like that one very much. It doesn't seem to have a lot of character and detail. So we're kind of looking for something that's really got a lot of detail. So let me just pause. I'm just going to kind of look through here. We're searching, and I actually put arm into the search. I found this one, which has two arms, which would be, both of them would be really usable. It might not be exactly the kind of arm you're looking for, but it would be really, let's see, um, it's very clear and in focus and detailed. So you might want to keep looking. I searched for teddy bear arm and I found that one. So keep looking for some of those features. And then what I would do is I would make your character much bigger to fill the screen a little bit more. And then for your background, I think it's quite simple, which is good. And I might just, oops, what did I do? There we go. Uh, Maybe, yeah, I like the idea of changing the color if you don't like that color. If you're going to change the color, something to keep in mind is to start, we're going to talk more about this next week, But if you want to start playing with color this week, what you want to do with your color is to really think about how all of your colors go together, you know, in terms of colors. Like right now, what I always do, and this is, you know, something you can do this week or next week, which is I name all the colors that I have existing. So in your case, you've got green, orange, pink, blue, you have red, and then sort of this kind of orangey color here, and then some grays. Um, and then some organic sort of brown colors in here. And so what you want to do is reduce the number of colors to just 2 or 3 colors, you know? So maybe what you'll do if you like red is like a lot of other colors will become red as well. So you start tying that together, you know, and I like the idea of making it red because then it starts, I think, looking a little bit more like Terrible Toys Todd. Again, you don't have to work too much on the, we'll talk a lot more about color next week. But for this week, what I would definitely do is maybe just start working a little bit more on the character and resizing it, and and we'll take it from there next week. Okay, Suzanne, hold on a second here. I was experimenting with the background a little bit. Here's what you have, and yeah, you know, so I love this text. I think this is an awesome text choice for your character, and let's see here. Interesting. Yeah, so it's interesting what it looks like. I'm not sure whether you found the background like this or whether you did some experimentation with it. Um, yeah, you know, but it's interesting, you know, sometimes what we'll do, you know, as designers is we'll take a photograph and we'll sort of fade it out or kind of remove color to kind of make it more background, which I think is a really good move. What I might do with this one, that's what I did before. I was like enlarging it to see if we could reduce even more of the clutter that is around it. It's not really clutter. It's actually a very well organized kitchen. I wish my kitchen looked like this, but it still tends to, I think, overpower the character a little bit. So I might like maybe make it larger or experiment with just maybe, you know, a simpler background in a kitchen for Flippin' Food Fran. I think that'd be awesome. And I'd also make your character bigger. So really get it filling the space, and I'd also make the text a little bit bigger. I think that'd be really good. Yeah, so keep working on that. So in your character too, I might experiment a little bit more, continue to experiment with your character. I'm still a little bit, it still feels like it's a little cluttered up here. I might just experiment to see what I could remove. And why is it, there's a lot of detail in other parts, like the lettuce, which is so beautiful and textured. And I think it looks great. I wouldn't do anything with that, with the texture of the lettuce. But I might experiment maybe with some of the other elements up here. Just to kind of, you know, again, just to see if you can, you know, and I think the eyes are awesome. And I think that the idea of the hard eyes is beautiful. So anyhow, just some of these smaller little details I might work a little bit more on. Um, what was the other thing I wanted to mention too? Oh yeah, the feet. I think the feet are super cool. And one thing that you can do with the feet is it would be great if you could sort of like right now it looks like like you've got them, they're actually disconnected from the character. Do you know what I mean? Would be nice if you could sort of make them appear that they were coming from underneath the skirt like feet would. And there's an easy way to experiment with that you can do with your layer mask. So if we take and go to our layer mask right here, let's just move this over a little bit. We can sort of create the illusion by masking some of the feet. Again, touching the layer mask there, making it selected. Now I'm going to, you know, I'm going to paint with black here onto the layer mask and use my right bracket tool here. So what I can do here is just actually, I might have to take and move this guy a little bit out, a little bit. Let's see here. You can kind of play around with that, but let's just kind of sort of going to go a little bit further over here. And I'm going to switch my color here and paint it back on now that I can see where this edge is. and go back and paint a little bit just along this edge. So you see what I'm doing here? I'm just kind of like creating this illusion that it's underneath, it's coming underneath her dress. You could probably tidy it up a little bit more, but you see how now it looks like it's coming out. And again, we did that non-destructively, so you could, work with something like that. Okay, so keep experimenting a little bit more. I think you're on a, really great track here. And yeah, okay, great, nice job, everybody. I look forward to seeing your final submissions. And next week, what we're going to do is we're going to work a little bit more on color. You'll learn some color techniques and also just some cosmetic cleanup of your photographs that we'll work on in the textbook exercise. So a lot of great things to still learn.